Hello and welcome to episode 4 of my Employment Law Snapshots. In this week's episode, I'll be looking at stupid things that people say on Facebook which leads them to being sacked, big faces and made in Chelsea. Before we get started, I have to confess that this week has been a bit of a televisual challenge for me at the end of every working day. The thing is, my mum's been staying at Tybalt House for the last couple of weeks, so I've been subconsciously tortured with the goings-on in Coronation Street, Emmerdale and EastEnders, and of a collection of toffs who are apparently made in Chelsea, but now appear to be living in Los Angeles. At one point, it took me a while to realise that my mum was flicking between two of these programmes, when I thought that I heard quite possibly the poshest woman alive, I think she was called Bunky or Binky, talking about going on a date, only then for me to glance up to see Paddy McGuinness sitting on a camping stool in Manchester talking about drinking a warm beer. Although I think I'd prefer watching a combination of Coronation Street and Made in Chelsea, it was all getting rather confusing for me. My celebrity-based torture continues as I also await the announcement of the next Z-lister, who'll be learning to waltz on Strictly Come Cringeworthy, although I'll keep my opinions about them off social media, because we all know how dangerous that can be, don't we? This week's case is called Smith against the British Waterways Board. Mr. Smith was a manual worker employed by British Waterways. He worked in a team of 8 operatives who were responsible for the maintenance of canals in Scotland. He was employed by the company for 8 years until his summary dismissal for gross misconduct. By way of background, Mr. Smith's team of canal maintenance operatives worked on a rota system, which meant that he was expected to be on standby for 7 days every 5 weeks or so. The company rules said that employees weren't allowed to drink alcohol during their standby periods. The issue that led to Mr. Smith's dismissal was because of a number of comments he made on Facebook. This problem came about because Mr. Smith had lodged grievances about his team leaders. However, one of Mr. Smith's team leaders, in response to the grievance and to show that the issues weren't exactly one-sided, provided the company with pages that he'd copied from Mr. Smith's Facebook page. The Facebook comments were posted 2 years earlier by Mr. Smith. Interestingly, Mr. Smith's manager had known about them for over a year and had discussed them before with the company's HR department. One post in particular related to a comment that Mr. Smith made in relation to drinking alcohol whilst on standby. It said, "On standby tonight, so only going to get half drunk." He didn't actually use that word, you'll have to use your imagination. The subsequent investigation also discovered other Facebook comments which made derogatory comments about his managers and work in general. The company's social media policy didn't allow action on the internet which might embarrass or discredit British Waterways, including defamation of third parties, for example by posting comments on bulletin boards or chat rooms. Mr. Smith was suspended and eventually dismissed for gross misconduct by British Waterways. Mr. Smith accepted that he had posted the comments, but in his defence he said that the derogatory comments were merely banter and he hadn't been drinking whilst on standby. The comments just formed part of a running joke with colleagues. The company didn't accept Mr. Smith's arguments and sacked him for making the derogatory comments and because he'd posted that he'd been drinking alcohol whilst on standby. The company concluded that his comments undermined the confidence that the company, other employees and the public would have in Mr. Smith's ability to perform his job. Mr. Smith brought a claim in the Employment Tribunal for unfair dismissal and Mr. Smith won. The Employment Tribunal decided that British Waterways' decision to dismiss Mr. Smith fell outside the band of reasonable responses which a reasonable employer might have taken. The Employment Tribunal said that the company hadn't taken into account the fact that the company had been aware of the Facebook comments for some time and done nothing about them, as well as Mr. Smith's previous unblemished record. As far as the allegation about drinking whilst on standby was concerned, the Employment Tribunal said that the company had failed to take into account the fact that there hadn't been any emergency on the night in question, so no harm was done. British Waterways appealed and British Waterways won. The Employment Appeal Tribunal decided that the original tribunal had made a mistake by substituting its own views in place of the company's, when it decided that they hadn't properly taken into account the mitigating factors. When it comes to unfair dismissal law, the Employment Tribunal can't do this. They're only allowed to decide whether an employer's decision falls within a range of reasonable responses, not whether they would have come to the same conclusion. So the lesson from this case remains that many employees are still incredibly naive when it comes to what they're willing to put on social media. If their employer's got a good social media policy in place and the employee says something that's either derogatory about their colleagues or their employer, or could bring them into disrepute, they're putting their jobs at risk. And I think these sorts of cases are going to be around for a long time to come. And finally, if your business isn't performing as well as it should be at the moment, you might want to take a look at your CEO's face. Not to check if the stress of it all's getting to them, but to see if they've got the necessary chiselled features for the job. This is because a professor from the Rollins College in America has just completed a study which has found that there's a strong link between a company's profits and the shape of its chief executive's face, but only if he's male. This is because male leaders who are successful usually have a wider than average face, which makes them appear more dominant and powerful, according to the study. Apparently, another study from Sussex University has come up with similar results for FTSE chief executives. On a similar note, a company which provides emotional intelligence training called TalentSmart has also reported recently that business leaders who spread their arms apart and show the palms of their hands while talking are much more successful than leaders who don't use these sorts of gestures. So I'm confident that my new anticipated chin implant and bizarre arm waving skills will lead to my inevitable promotion to Chief Executive of a PLC in no time at all. What could possibly go wrong? Thanks for watching. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more updates, click here. If you want to follow us on our Twitter page, which gives you a daily heads up about everything employment law related, click here. Or if you just want any more information or help, please go to our website by clicking here. And of course, all the links are below. Once again, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.